A billionaire stopped dead on a Manhattan sidewalk. The woman selling flowers on the corner was the same nurse who had held his dying wife's hand 2 years ago, the only one who stayed through the screaming and the silence and the final breath. He didn't offer money. He didn't call his driver. He didn't keep walking. He did the one thing no one expected, and it would unravel a secret his dying wife had whispered to that nurse in her last hour, a message meant for him. One that had waited 730 days to be delivered and would change both of their lives in ways neither of them was ready to face. 54-year-old Darnell Okafor lived on the 38th floor of a limestone tower on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across every wall, framing Central Park like a painting no one had asked for. The art collection alone was worth $3.4 million. Sculptures from Legos, oils from a gallery in Chelsea that Camille had loved, a hand-carved wooden mask from his grandmother's village in Anambra State, mounted above the fireplace like a quiet ancestor watching over an empire built from nothing. The dining table seated 10. Only one chair was ever pulled out. Not his, Camille's chair. Second from the end, left side angled slightly toward the window because she liked to watch the light change over the park while she ate. Nobody sat in it. Nobody moved it. The housekeeper dusted it every Tuesday and Thursday, careful not to shift it even half an inch. Darnell Okafor was the founder and CEO of Okafor Venture Holdings, a real estate and clean energy conglomerate valued at $9.2 billion. He had built it from a one-bedroom apartment in West Baltimore with a borrowed laptop and a business plan scribbled on the back of a church bulletin. 30 years later, he owned commercial properties in 14 cities, solar farms across 3 states, and a development portfolio that reshaped skylines. His watch cost $47,000. His suits were hand-tailored in Milan. His name appeared on Forbes lists and philanthropy galas and the donor walls of 3 universities. None of it mattered. Every morning, at exactly 6:15, Darnell walked 2 blocks to a coffee shop on Lexington Avenue. He ordered the same thing. Oat milk, latte, extra shot cinnamon on top. $6.75. He carried it back to the penthouse, set it on the nightstand on the left side of the bed, Camille's side. He watched the steam rise and curl and vanish. He waited until it went cold. Then he poured it down the bathroom sink. Every single morning. 730 days. He never drank it. He never skipped it. It was the only ritual that still made sense, the only thing that still connected his hands to something that felt like her. Camille Okafor had died 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 4 by the time they caught it. 7 months from diagnosis to the end. 7 months of treatments that promised everything and delivered nothing. 7 months of watching the sharpest, warmest, most alive woman he had ever known become someone he barely recognized. She had been a pediatric speech therapist before the diagnosis, worked with children who couldn't form words, who trapped whole worlds behind locked jaws and silent tongues. She had a gift for patience, for waiting, for believing that what couldn't be said yet would eventually find its way out. Darnell had none of those gifts. He had speed, he had strategy, he had the ability to read a room, close a deal, and move on to the next one before the ink dried. That skill had built an empire. It had also kept him in a conference room on the worst night of his life. Camille had said something to him once, toward the end, something important. He could feel the shape of it in his memory, the weight of it pressing against the inside of his skull like a word stuck on the tip of his tongue. But the actual words were gone, blurred, like a song playing in a room he had locked the door to and lost the key. He tried to remember it at night, lying in the dark on his side of the bed, staring at the cold space where she used to sleep. But grief had a way of swallowing the things you needed most and leaving you with the things you wanted to forget. He remembered the last contract he reviewed that night, a $780 million acquisition. He remembered the weight of the pen, the color of the ink, the exact grain of the mahogany conference table where he sat while his wife was dying 11 miles away. He could not remember the face of the woman who held Camille's hand while she took her last breath. He knew someone had been there. A nurse. He had arrived at the hospital too late, pushed through the door of her room, and found Camille already still, already gone, already covered in white. And in the hallway outside, a woman had been sitting on a plastic chair, head bowed, shoulders shaking. A nurse in wrinkled scrubs who had clearly been crying for a long time. Darnell had walked right past her. He did not stop. He did not ask her name. He did not say thank you. He went straight into the room and stood over his wife's body and realized he had traded the last hours of her life for a signature on a piece of paper. 2 years later, he still could not remember that nurse's face. He had memorized the last contract he signed that night down to the clause numbers. But the woman who stayed when he did not, the woman who held Camille's hand so she would not die alone, was a blur, a ghost without a name. And that fact haunted him more than the grief itself. 2 years before that, Manhattan's sidewalk changed everything. Camille Okafor was dying on the 7th floor of Mount Sinai Hospital. Room 714. Private suite. $3,800 a night. Fresh flowers delivered every morning by a service Darnell had arranged because Camille once mentioned she hated the smell of hospitals. White peonies and lavender. Always white peonies and lavender. The room had a view of the East River. A flat-screen television mounted on the wall that Camille never turned on. A reclining chair in the corner where Darnell was supposed to sit but rarely did. And a narrow hospital bed with rails that clicked up and down, where a woman who once danced barefoot in her kitchen to Stevie Wonder now lay tethered to morphine drips and monitoring wires. The cancer had spread. Liver, lungs, lymph nodes. The doctors spoke in careful language words designed to soften the unsoftenable. Camille knew. She had always been smarter than the room she was in. The nursing staff rotated in shifts. 4 hours on, 4 hours off. But as Camille entered her final weeks, the rotations thinned. The screaming came at night. Pain so deep that morphine only dulled the edges. She would cry out for hours, her body arching against sheets soaked with sweat, calling for Darnell, calling for her mother who had been dead for 11 years, calling for anyone. One by one, the nurses requested transfers. It was not cruelty, it was survival. Watching someone die slowly, loudly, with that kind of suffering, it eroded something inside the people who stood closest to it. By the final week, only one nurse remained. Jolene Baptiste, 32 years old. Born in Port-au-Prince, raised in Flatbush, Brooklyn. Single mother to a 6-year-old boy named Nico, who was staying with her mother, Marie, in a 2-bedroom apartment in East New York. Jolene had been a registered nurse for 9 years. She worked nights because the pay differential helped cover daycare. She took the shifts no one else wanted because she could not afford to say no. But she stayed with Camille for a different reason. She stayed because she could not leave a woman to die alone. On the nights when the pain peaked and Camille screamed until her voice gave out, Jolene would sit on the edge of the bed, take Camille's hand, and sing Creole lullabies her grandmother had taught her in a kitchen in Haiti, songs about the ocean and the moon and children who were loved even when the world was dark. She would braid Camille's hair when she could not sleep, gentle fingers working through strands that had grown thin and brittle from treatment, and she would talk. She told Camille about Nico, about how he wanted to be a doctor, about how he practiced giving checkups to his stuffed animals with a toy stethoscope he had found at a thrift store, about how he once told her with absolute seriousness, "Mama, when I grow up, I am going to fix everyone." Camille laughed. It was the last time she laughed. In the final hour, the monitors beeped slower. Jolene knew the pattern. She had heard it before, the way the body surrendered in stages, like a house, turning off its lights room by room. Camille's eyes opened. Her voice was barely a whisper. Cracked, dry, but every word was deliberate, chosen with the precision of a woman who knew these were the last sentences she would ever speak. Jolene leaned in. She listened. She nodded. Tears ran down her face and dripped onto the hospital blanket. She never told anyone what Camille said. Not the doctors, not the other nurses, not Darnell, who was 11 miles away in a glass-walled conference room, pen in hand, finalizing a $780 million acquisition while his wife whispered her last words to a stranger. At Trey Tall a.m. Jolene's hand was the one Camille held when her heart stopped. At 3:12 a.m., Darnell's hand was wrapped around a Mont Blanc fountain pen worth $900, pressing ink into paper that would be forgotten by the next quarter. The phone rang at 3:14 a.m. Darnell answered on the second ring. His body went still. The pen dropped. It rolled across $45,000 worth of mahogany and fell to the floor without a sound. He arrived at the hospital at 3:51 a.m. 39 minutes too late. Camille had already been covered. The machines had already been silenced. The room smelled like antiseptic and lavender and something else, something final like the air after a candle goes out. In the hallway, a nurse sat on a molded plastic chair, her scrubs wrinkled, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling with the kind of crying that had no sound left in it. She had been there for hours. She had sung and braided and held and listened and stayed. Darnell walked past her. His shoes clicked on linoleum. His eyes were fixed on the door. His mind was already breaking apart, already trying to reassemble itself around a world that no longer contained Camille. He walked past the only person who had been there when he should have been, and he never looked back. The months after Camille's death did not destroy Jolene all at once. They dismantled her piece by piece, the way water eats through stone, slow and invisible until the whole foundation is gone. She went back to work 3 days after the funeral. There was no choice. Rent was $1,700 a month. Nico needed school supplies. Marie's blood pressure medication cost $240 every refill. Grief was a luxury Jolene could not afford. But the damage had already started. She could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the monitors. The beeping. The silence after the beeping stopped. She heard Camille's voice, that final whisper, the words she had promised to carry and could not set down. Her hands began to shake during blood draws. Her focus drifted mid-shift. She would stand in the medication room holding a syringe and forget for 3 or 4 seconds where she was. 3 or 4 seconds that felt like falling. 8 months after Camille's death, Jolene made a mistake. She miscalculated a dosage, entered 4 milligrams instead of 0.4 on a pain management chart. The patient was not harmed. The error was caught by a pharmacist before administration. But the incident report was filed. The review board convened. And Mount Sinai, the same hospital where Jolene had held a dying woman's hand through the worst night of both their lives, terminated her employment. Effective immediately. No severance, no letter of recommendation. Her nursing license was placed under temporary suspension, 18 months before she could even apply for reinstatement. The word they used was negligence. The word they should have used was exhaustion. 3 months after losing her job, Marie had a stroke. She survived, but the left side of her body went quiet. She could not cook, could not climb stairs, could not watch Nico while Jolene looked for work. The doctor said she needed full-time care. Jolene found a nursing home in Queens, $4,200 a month. Her savings account held $2,340. The math did not work. It never works for people like Jolene. She sold what she could. The couch, the kitchen table. Nico's bicycle, the blue one with the bell that played a little song when you squeezed it. He cried when she carried it out, then wiped his face and said it was okay that he was getting too big for it anyway. He was 7. The apartment went next. Missed rent. Then missed again. The landlord filed eviction papers on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Jolene and Nico were standing in the intake line at a family shelter on West 95th Street with 2 suitcases and a backpack shaped like a dinosaur. Nico looked up at the fluorescent lights, the cinder block walls, the rows of cots separated by hanging sheets. "Mama, is this like a sleepover?" Jolene swallowed something sharp that had lodged in the back of her throat. "Yeah, baby. A really long sleepover." She started buying flowers at 4 in the morning from the wholesale market in Chelsea. Roses, tulips, daisies, whatever was cheapest that day. She bundled them into small bouquets, filled a plastic bucket with water, and carried them on the subway to a corner near Central Park at 72nd and Columbus. She sold them for $5 to $7 each. On a good day, she made $19. On a bad day, $8. On a rainy day, nothing. Nico sat beside her on an upturned milk crate, doing homework on a flattened cardboard box, his pencils lined up neatly in a row because Jolene had taught him that even when the world fell apart, you kept your things in order. Their lunch cost $7.50. 2 sandwiches and a bottle of water from the bodega on the corner. They split the water. 14 blocks south, Darnell Okafor sat alone at a corner table in Per Se. The tasting menu was $350 per person. He ordered wine he did not drink. He watched the candle flicker. He thought about nothing and everything, and the woman whose chair he still could not bring himself to push in. 2 people separated by 14 blocks and 2 years of silence. One drowning in wealth, the other drowning in its absence. Neither knew the other was still carrying the weight of the same night, the same room, the same final breath that had changed both of their lives forever. Darnell Okafor decided to walk. It was the second anniversary of Camille's death, and for reasons he could not explain, he did not want the car, did not want the leather seats, or the tinted windows, or the silence of a driver who knew better than to speak. He wanted pavement under his feet. He wanted noise. He wanted the city the way Camille had loved it, loud and impatient and alive. The late afternoon sun cut sideways through the gaps between buildings on Central Park West, throwing long gold bars of light across the sidewalk. Traffic crawled. A pretzel cart steamed on the corner of 72nd, the smell of warm salt mixing with exhaust and early spring air. Leaves barely green clung to the branches above the park wall like they were still deciding whether to trust the season. Darnell walked south. His coat was cashmere, his shoes were Italian. His mind was in a hospital room 2 years and 1,000 miles behind him. He needed flowers, white peonies, Camille's favorite. She used to buy them every Saturday from a bodega in Harlem when they were young and poor, and sharing a studio apartment with a radiator that clanked like a heartbeat. She would arrange them herself, always the same way. White peonies. One sprig of lavender, crossed on the left side, tucked between the stems at an angle that made no sense to anyone but her. He spotted the flower stand from half a block away. A plastic bucket on the sidewalk. Bundles of roses, tulips, daisies wrapped in cellophane and newspaper. A woman sat behind them on an upturned crate, her jacket thin for March, her hands rough and reddened. Beside her a boy, maybe 7 or 8, lay on his stomach on a flattened cardboard box, drawing with colored pencils worn down to stubs. Darnell stopped. "How much for the peonies?" $7, sir. Just the peonies. Nothing else. She reached into the bucket without looking up. Her fingers moved quickly, practiced pulling stems and shaking off water. She wrapped them in brown paper, and then she did something that made no sense. She reached into a small jar beside her crate, pulled out a single sprig of lavender and tucked it into the bouquet, on the left side, crossed over the stems. At an angle, Darnell took the flowers, handed her a $50 bill. "Keep it." She looked up to protest. Their eyes met. Jolene's hands stopped moving. Her lips parted slightly. The color left her face like a tide pulling out. She recognized him instantly, completely, the way the body remembers a car accident years after the glass has been swept away. Darnell did not recognize her. He turned to leave, took 2 steps, then 3. The lavender hit him first. Not the sight of it. The smell. It reached something deep in his chest, something below language, below thought. A kitchen counter in Harlem. A nightstand in the penthouse. A windowsill where Camille would stand barefoot arranging flowers while humming a song he could never name. He looked down at the bouquet, the lavender, on the left side, crossed over the stems. He had seen that arrangement 1,000 times. No florist did it that way, no flower shop, no online tutorial. It was Camille's way, her invention, her small private ritual that she never explained to anyone, except maybe the person who had watched her closest in those final days. Darnell turned around slowly. The woman was staring at him. Her eyes were wet but steady. She was not crying. She was holding herself perfectly still, the way a person does when any movement might break something that cannot be repaired. "The lavender," Darnell's voice came out low. Almost a whisper. "You put it on the left side, crossed over the stems." She said nothing. "How did you know she liked it that way?" Silence. The boy looked up from his drawing, brown eyes, curious, unafraid. "Mama, do you know this man?" Jolene's hand found the boy's shoulder, a reflex, protective, primal. "Yes, baby. I knew his wife." The word hit Darnell like a fist wrapped in velvet. Wife. Present tense flipped to past in someone else's mouth, and it still cut every single time. He looked at Jolene. Really looked. Past the thin jacket and the cracked hands and the weariness pressed into every line of her face. He looked at the plastic bucket, the cardboard box, the colored pencils worn to nothing, the boy doing homework on a sidewalk because there was nowhere else. And then the memory surfaced. Not her face, her hands. Hands wrapped around Camille's fingers in a hospital bed. Hands that were there at 3:12 a.m. when his were holding a pen. The same hands. now red and split from thorns and cold water and 14-hour days selling $7 bouquets on a Manhattan sidewalk. Something shifted behind his ribs. Not pain this time. Not grief. Something sharper. Something worse. Shame. Darnell did not walk away. He looked at the sidewalk. Dirty. Gum-stained. Cracked. Then he sat down on it anyway, his $5,200 Tom Ford suit pressing into concrete that hadn't been cleaned since winter. His knees cracked. His back protested. He didn't care. He sat next to the bucket of flowers like a man who had forgotten how to stand in the world he'd built and was trying to remember how to sit in someone else's. You were there. That last night, Jolene's jaw tightened. Yes, I came too late. By the time I arrived, she was already gone. And you were in the hallway, sitting on that plastic chair. I walked right past you. I remember, Jolene said quietly. I didn't even ask your name. You had other things on your mind. That's not an excuse. Darnell's voice broke slightly at the edges, like a door that had been closed too hard too many times. That is not an excuse. A taxi honked 3 times in rapid succession. Nico turned a page in his notebook. A petal from a yellow rose broke loose in the breeze and drifted onto the sidewalk between them. I need to know what happened, Darnell said. After that night, to you. How did you end up here? Jolene stiffened. I'm fine, Mr. Okafor. We're fine. You're selling flowers in March with no gloves, and your son is doing math on cardboard. That is not fine. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because I was not there that night and you were. And I think I owe you at least the truth about what happened. Jolene stared at the bucket for a long time. I lost my position at the hospital, she said finally. Made a mistake on a chart. Got let go. Then my mama got sick. Stroke. She needs full-time care now. The bills came faster than I could keep up. We lost the apartment. Been at the shelter on 95th when there's room. This, she gestured at the flowers, is what I can do for now. It's honest. Nico eats every day. We're making it. She said it the way soldiers describe a battle. Flat. Factual. No room for pity, because pity was a luxury she had cut from her life, the same way she had cut everything else that wasn't essential. Darnell heard what she said, but he also heard what she did not say. She did not explain why she lost the position. She did not connect it to Camille. She carried that part of the story like a stone in her pocket, heavy and hidden. He wanted to ask. He almost did. Instead, he asked the question that had lived in his chest for 730 days. Camille. At the end. Did she say anything? The air between them changed. Something tightened. Something old and sacred and fragile. Jolene's eyes closed for half a second. When they opened, they were steady but full. She said something Jolene said carefully. But it wasn't for me to carry. It was meant for you, and I don't think a sidewalk is the right place. Darnell's throat locked. Camille's voice flickered in his head again. Closer now. Clearer. Like someone calling his name from the end of a long hallway, but still not close enough to hear the words. Nico tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mama, this one broke. He held up a daisy with a bent stem, the petals drooping but still white. Then he turned to Darnell and extended it with absolute seriousness. It broke, but it still smells good. You can have it. Darnell took the flower. His hand trembled. Thank you, he said. His voice came out rough. Undone. He looked at Jolene. Let me help. Please. Whatever you need. Jolene shook her head immediately. I didn't stay with your wife, so you'd owe me, Mr. Okafor. I stayed because she needed someone. That's what nurses do. That's what people do. I don't want your money. I don't want a debt repaid. I just want to sell my flowers and take care of my son. Darnell studied her face. Dignity lived there, fierce and unbroken, the same way he'd once seen it in Camille's eyes when the doctors told her the treatment wasn't working and she had simply nodded and asked what time dinner was. He stood up, brushed off his pants, looked at the bucket. How many bouquets do you have left? Jolene blinked. Maybe 30. I'll take all of them. Mr. Okafor, that's $180 worth of flowers. You don't need 30 bouquets. It's not charity. Darnell pulled out his wallet. Camille loved flowers. Every kind. Consider this, me buying them for her. Jolene opened her mouth. closed it. She looked at Nico, who was watching the exchange with wide, careful eyes. She took the money. Darnell gathered the bouquets in his arms, roses and tulips and daisies and peonies, spilling over his cashmere sleeves, water dripping onto his shoes, petals catching in the March wind. He looked ridiculous. He knew it. A billionaire, standing on a Manhattan sidewalk, holding 30 bouquets of bodega-grade flowers, like a man who had just proposed to an entire city. He had no idea where to put them, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was coming back. Day 3. Tulips and a nod. Darnell arrived at 72nd and Columbus at 8:30 in the morning, the earliest he could slip away from the apartment without his assistant asking questions. Jolene was already there. She had been there since 5:30, 3 hours on her feet before he even woke up. He bought a dozen tulips. She wrapped them without conversation. He said thank you. She said have a good day. He walked 12 blocks north and put them in a vase on the dining table. First flowers in that penthouse in 2 years. Day 7. Sunflowers and a question. How's your son doing in school? Jolene paused mid-rap. Her eyes narrowed slightly the way a person does when kindness arrives from an unexpected direction and they need a moment to decide if it's real. He's doing okay. Likes math. Hates reading out loud. His teacher says he's smart, but quiet. Quiet's not bad, Darnell said. I was quiet. You don't seem quiet. I learned to fake it. She almost smiled. Almost. Day 9. Darnell noticed the hours. Jolene arrived at the corner at 5:30 in the morning. She carried the bucket from the subway 3 trains with a transfer because she couldn't afford a cab. She stood there until 7 in the evening. 13.5 hours. On concrete, in shoes that had been resoled twice. $19 on a good day. Day 11. Roses and something unexpected. Nico showed Darnell a drawing he had made during school. A house with a red door and a garden and a dog. Mama says we can't have a dog right now, Nico explained. But when we get a house, I'm going to name him Biscuit. Why Biscuit? Because biscuits make everyone happy. Darnell laughed. Actually laughed? The sound came out rusty and uncertain like a machine starting up after years in storage. Jolene stared at him, then she laughed too. Short and surprised like she had forgotten she could. It caught them both off guard. Day 14. Darnell noticed the shoes. Nico wore sneakers that had been white once. The sole was separating from the toe on the left one. A rubber band held it together. A kid in the schoolyard had pointed it out, apparently. Called them trash shoes. Nico told his mother about it on the walk home. Jolene's face went tight, controlled. The kind of tight that only a parent knows the rage at a world that punishes your child for being poor, swallowed down because there is nothing you can do about it that a $7 bouquet can fix. But Nico shrugged. I like my shoes, he said. Mama bought them with flower money. Darnell heard that sentence, and something inside his chest cracked along a fault line that had been widening for 2 weeks. Day 14 later. Nico fell asleep at 6 in the evening, slumped over his cardboard desk, cheek pressed against a half-finished math worksheet. His pencil rolled off the edge and landed in a puddle. Jolene picked it up, dried it on her sleeve, placed it back next to his hand. She didn't wake him. She just pulled his hood up and kept selling flowers. Day 18. Rain, not heavy. A cold drizzle that turned the sidewalk dark and the sky the color of old dishwater. Jolene did not come. Darnell arrived at the corner at 8:45. The spot was empty. No bucket, no crate, no Nico, no cardboard, just wet concrete and a gutter running gray. He stood there. He stood there for 25 minutes. His suit jacket soaked through, his shoes filled with water, his phone buzzed 11 times. He answered none of them. When he finally turned around and walked home, dripping through the lobby of his building past a doorman who stared but said nothing, he realized what the feeling in his chest was. It was worry, not the kind of worry he felt when a deal was slipping. Not the boardroom kind, the numbers kind, the quarterly projections kind. This was different. This was older, more human. The kind of worry that sits in the pit of your stomach and whispers, what if something happened and you weren't there? He hadn't felt that specific kind of worry since the night the doctor called with Camille's last scan results. And standing in his penthouse, water pooling on the marble floor, surrounded by 14 days' worth of flowers he had bought from a woman he was only beginning to know, Darnell Okafor understood something he had spent 2 years avoiding. He was not coming back to that corner for flowers. He was coming back because for the first time since Camille died, someone needed him to show up. And for the first time in his life, showing up was the only thing he wanted to do. Darnell found the shelter through the front desk coordinator, a woman named Paulette, who recognized his name and his face, and tried very hard not to stare at his watch while she led him down a hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and boiled vegetables. The family wing was on the 2nd floor. 6 beds per room, metal frames bolted to the floor, thin mattresses covered in vinyl that squeaked when you moved. 1 window per room painted shut, a plastic bin under each bed for personal belongings. That was it. That was everything. Darnell stood in the doorway of room 2B and felt his lungs tighten. Jolene was lying on the bottom bunk nearest the wall. Her face was flushed, her breathing was shallow and ragged. A damp washcloth sat folded on her forehead, placed there by hands too small to belong to anyone but Nico. The boy sat cross-legged on the floor beside her bed. He had a coloring book open but was not coloring. He was watching his mother breathe, counting the seconds between each inhale the way a child does when they are scared but do not have the words for it yet. On the pillow next to Jolene's head, Nico's clothes were folded into a perfect square. 2 shirts, 1 pair of pants, underwear, socks rolled into tight balls. Everything clean, everything precise. The kind of order that only exists when the person maintaining it has nothing else they can control. And on top of the folded clothes, a sandwich in a Ziploc bag, peanut butter on white bread cut diagonally, a small apple sliced into quarters, and a handwritten note on a torn piece of notebook paper. Darnell picked up the note. 5 words, written in pencil. Letters shaking slightly at the edges. You are my brave boy. She had made his lunch. She was burning with fever on a vinyl mattress in a room with 5 strangers, and she had gotten up at some point to make her son a sandwich and cut an apple and write him a note so he would not be afraid. Darnell's hand trembled. He set the note back down exactly where he found it. Mr. Darnell, Nico's voice. Small, steady, not scared exactly, but careful. The way a child sounds when they have learned that adults do not always fix things. Hey buddy, is your mom sleeping? She's hot. I keep putting the cold towel on her head like she does when I'm sick. But she keeps talking in her sleep. She says weird things. What kind of things? Nico looked at his mother. His jaw tightened in a way that no 8-year-old's jaw should know how to tighten. She keeps saying a lady's name, and sorry. She keeps saying sorry. Darnell pulled the plastic chair from the corner and sat beside Jolene's bed. The chair wobbled. One leg was shorter than the others. From somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. A door slammed. A television played too loud through thin walls. Jolene stirred. Her lips moved. I couldn't sleep after Mrs. Okafor. Her voice was thin, broken. The words came in fragments pulled from somewhere beneath the fever. I kept seeing her face. Every time I closed my eyes. Her face. Her hands. Darnell leaned forward. I made a mistake because I was too tired. I couldn't stop seeing her. I couldn't stop hearing the monitors. They fired me because I couldn't stop caring. They said negligence. But I wasn't negligent. I was exhausted. I was broken. I was still in that room. I never left that room. The words hit Darnell like a door blown open in a storm. She had not lost her job because she was careless. She had not made a mistake because she was incompetent. She had fallen apart because she had given too much of herself to a dying woman in a hospital bed, a woman named Camille Okafor, and the system that employed her had no protocol for that kind of damage. The chain was clear, brutal, unbroken. Jolene stayed with Camille. Jolene absorbed the trauma of watching her die. Jolene could not sleep. Jolene's hands shook. Jolene miscalculated a dosage. Jolene was terminated. Jolene lost her income. Jolene's mother had a stroke. Jolene lost her home. Jolene ended up on a sidewalk selling flowers because she had cared too much, because she had stayed, because she had done what Darnell should have done. Camille's voice surged in his head, louder now, urgent, not words yet, just a sound, a pressure, like someone pounding on a door from the inside. Darnell reached out and took Jolene's hand. Her fingers were burning hot, rough, cracked at the knuckles. The same fingers that had braided Camille's hair and held her hand through the last hour and arranged lavender in peonies on a sidewalk 2 years later. He sat there, in a plastic chair with a broken leg, in a room that smelled like bleach and defeat, holding the hand of a woman who had lost everything because she had loved his wife more than a job required. If this story is reaching you, take a second to subscribe and share it. Now let's continue. For the first time, the billionaire was on the other side of that bedside. Not the one with the money, not the one with the power, the one who could do nothing but sit and hold on and hope it was enough. And he understood something that no amount of wealth had ever taught him. Helplessness was not about lacking money, it was about arriving too late. Darnell made phone calls from the hallway of the shelter, while Nico slept on the floor beside his mother's bed, his small hand resting on her arm like an anchor. The first call was to a healthcare attorney named Claudia Reese. $38,000 in legal fees. Darnell approved it without hesitation. Jolene's record before the incident had been clean. 9 years. 0 complaints. Multiple commendations. The dosage error had been flagged as negligence, but the medical evidence pointed clearly to burnout induced by sustained trauma exposure. Claudia said the case for reinstatement was strong, not guaranteed, but strong. The second call was to a property manager in Washington Heights. 2-bedroom apartment, 3rd floor, clean building, safe block, near a bus line that ran directly to Mount Sinai. Near a public school with a STEM after-school program that was free for qualifying families. $2,600 a month. Darnell paid 6 months up front. The third call was to a nursing facility on the Upper West Side. $5,100 a month. Better staff ratio, better physical therapy program, a garden where residents could sit in the afternoon. He arranged for Marie's transfer by the end of the week. The fourth call was to Nico's new school. He confirmed enrollment, asked about the after-school program, asked if they had counseling services. They did. He made a note to follow up. He did not ask Jolene's permission. He knew what she would say. When Jolene woke up 2 days later, the fever broken, her body still weak but her mind sharp, Nico was the one who told her. Not Darnell. Darnell had not come back since the night at the shelter. He had left instructions with Paulette and sent everything through intermediaries. But the paperwork was on the plastic chair beside her bed. Apartment lease, school enrollment, legal retainer agreement, nursing home transfer authorization. All signed, all paid, all in her name. Jolene read every document. Slowly, carefully. The way a person reads a contract when they have learned that the fine print is where the trap lives. Then she picked up the phone and called the only number on the contact sheet. Darnell answered on the second ring. Who gave you the right? Jolene's voice was low, controlled, but the edges were trembling. I am not a project, Mr. Okafor. I am not your guilt relief. I am not some broken thing you get to fix so you can sleep better at night. I didn't stay with your wife so you could save me and feel better about yourself. Darnell was silent. She kept going. I have been taking care of myself and my son for 8 years. Alone. No father, no family, no safety net. I have worked double shifts and skipped meals and slept on floors and sold flowers in the cold for $7 a bunch. I did that. Me. And I did not ask for help. Not from the hospital. Not from the city. Not from you. Do you understand? I understand, Darnell said quietly. Then, why did you do this without asking me? Because you would have said no. That is my right. Yes, it is. Silence. Long. Heavy. A siren passed somewhere outside the shelter window. Nico appeared in the doorway. His eyes were wide. Mama, why are you yelling? Jolene's face changed instantly. The anger folded inward, tucked away behind the part of her that was always a mother first. I'm not yelling, baby. I'm just talking. Go finish your drawing, okay? Nico left, slowly, looking back twice. Jolene returned to the phone. Her voice was lower now. Strained. Darnell spoke before she could. You are right. About all of it. This is not about making me feel better. Because nothing will make me feel better. Camille is gone. She is not coming back. No apartment, and no lawyer, and no amount of money will change that. But she would have been alone that last night if you had not stayed. She would have died with no one holding her hand. That was supposed to be me. I was supposed to be there. And I wasn't. I was in a conference room signing a piece of paper that I cannot even remember now. I failed the only person who ever mattered to me. The least I can do, the very least, is not fail twice. Jolene was quiet for a long time. This doesn't fix what happened, she said finally. No, it doesn't. And I don't owe you gratitude. No, you don't. And if I take this, it's not for me. It's for Nico. Everything I have ever done is for him. I know, Darnell said. I saw it in the sandwich, in the note you wrote, in the way you fold his clothes when you can barely stand. Jolene's breath caught. And for your wife, she said, quieter now, almost a whisper. She asked me to take care of him. I can't do that from a shelter. Darnell's chest seized. She asked me to take care of him. The words landed like stones dropped into still water, rippling outward in directions he could not yet follow. He did not ask what Camille had said. Not yet. Not like this. But the shape of it was forming, slowly. Like a photograph developing in the dark. Okay, Jolene said. For Nico. Only for Nico. And when I get my license back, I pay you back. Every cent. Darnell closed his eyes. Deal. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and new carpet, and the particular kind of emptiness that exists in a space no one has lived in yet. Clean emptiness. The kind that waits to be filled. Jolene stood in the doorway. She did not step inside. Her hand rested on the doorframe, fingers pressing into the wood like she was testing whether it was real. Whether it would hold. Whether the floor would drop out from under her if she trusted it. Nico had no such hesitation. He burst past her like a horse out of a gate, his sneakers squeaking on the laminate floor, his backpack bouncing against his shoulder blades. He ran to the kitchen first, opened the refrigerator, closed it, opened it again. Mama, it's cold inside. That's what refrigerators do, baby. I know, but it works. Like it really works. He ran to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, turned it off, turned it on again. Hot water, Mama. Then the light switch. On, off, on, off, on. Mama. The light works when I push it. Jolene's hand was still on the doorframe. Her knuckles had gone white. Darnell stood behind her in the hallway holding a box of kitchen supplies he had picked up that morning. Plates, cups, a set of utensils, dish soap, paper towels, small things, ordinary things. Things that cost almost nothing but meant everything when you had been eating off paper plates in a shelter for the better part of a year. It's yours, he said gently. No conditions. Jolene took one step inside. Then another. She moved the way someone walks through a house in a dream, touching the walls, the countertop, the curtains that someone had already hung. She opened a closet. Empty. Waiting. She turned on the kitchen faucet and let the water run over her hands. Just stood there. Feeling it. Hot water, on demand, in her own kitchen, in her own apartment. She had not had hot water on demand in 11 months. Darnell spent the afternoon assembling furniture. A bed frame for Nico. A bookshelf from a flat-pack box that came with 37 screws and instructions that made no sense. A small desk for homework. Nico appointed himself supervisor. He made a hard hat out of a cardboard box, wrote boss on it in red marker, and insisted Darnell wear one too. Safety first, Mr. Darnell. Darnell put on the cardboard hat. It sat crooked on his head, too small, ridiculous. He hadn't laughed like that since Camille. Jolene started her burnout recovery program the following Monday. 3 sessions a week. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Group counseling with other healthcare workers who had experienced compassion fatigue. Mandatory. Non-negotiable. The state board required it for license reinstatement. She went every session. Arrived early, stayed late. She approached it the way she approached everything. With discipline, with silence. With the quiet ferocity of a woman who had decided that falling apart was not an option. Nico started at his new school on a Wednesday. He came home with a permission slip for the STEM after-school program and a drawing of a robot he had designed. The robot's name was Helper. It cleaned houses and made sandwiches and never got tired. On Friday, Nico came home with something else. A birthday party invitation. Handwritten, from a boy named Deshawn. Blue envelope, dinosaur stickers on the seal. Jolene opened it at the kitchen table. Read it twice. Set it down. Pressed both hands flat against the surface. Then she cried. Not the controlled crying she had taught herself in the shelter, silent, brief, efficient. Real crying. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and old and full of every moment you held yourself together because your child was watching and you couldn't afford to break. Nico stood beside her, alarmed. Mama, it's just a party. I know, baby. I know. These are happy tears. She wiped her face, smiled, pulled him close. It was the first birthday party invitation Nico had received since they lost the apartment. The first time another child had said, I want you there. That evening, after Nico fell asleep in his own bed, in his own room, in a bed that did not squeak on metal rails and was not shared with strangers, Jolene and Darnell stood in the small kitchen. Jolene boiled water in a kettle she had found in the cabinet, poured 2 cups of tea, set one in front of Darnell. They stood there for a while, not talking, listening to the building settle, the radiator clicking on, traffic outside, the particular silence that only exists in a home that is new and safe and yours. I keep thinking I'll wake up back at the shelter, Jolene said. You won't, Darnell said. This is yours. Silence again, steam rising from the cups, the refrigerator humming. She would have liked this, Jolene said quietly. Camille, she would have liked knowing you did this. Darnell swallowed hard. His throat locked the way it always did when someone said her name out loud. She would have liked knowing you did what you did, he said. That night, every night before it, Jolene looked at her tea, wrapped both hands around the cup. Her eyes were full but steady. She was easy to love, Mr. Okafor. That's the part nobody tells you about that job. The dying ones. Sometimes they're the easiest to love. And that's what breaks you. Darnell nodded. He did not trust himself to speak. Somewhere in his chest, behind the grief and the guilt and the quiet warmth of standing in a kitchen that smelled like fresh paint and peppermint tea, Camille's voice stirred again, clearer now, close enough to almost hear. Like someone standing just outside a door waiting to be let in. But not yet. Not yet. 3 months later, the apartment smelled like jollof rice, and something sweet and fried that Darnell could not name but had learned to love. Jolene's griot. Pork shoulder marinated in citrus and Scotch bonnet fried until the edges went dark and crisp. She made it every Friday now. Nico's favorite. Darnell brought the rice, his mother's recipe, tomato paste habanero, smoked paprika bay leaves, and a patience he did not possess for anything else in his life. They ate at the kitchen table. All 3 of them. Nico talked about his science project, a volcano that erupted baking soda and vinegar. Deshawn had been his partner. They got a B+. Nico thought they deserved an A, but said the eruption leaned a little to the left. It leaned because you used too much vinegar, Jolene said. It leaned because volcanoes are unpredictable, Mama. That's the whole point. Darnell smiled. He ate. He listened. He existed in a room where people talked about baking soda, volcanoes, and B+ grades and leftover rice, and for the first time in over 2 years, the silence inside his chest did not scream. After dinner, Nico fell asleep on the couch. Jolene carried him to bed, tucked the blanket around his shoulders, kissed his forehead, closed the door halfway because he liked the hallway light. She came back to the kitchen. Darnell was washing dishes. She picked up a towel and dried. They stood side by side for a while, water running, plates clinking, the ordinary machinery of a life being lived. Then Jolene set the towel down. I think it's time, she said. Darnell turned off the faucet. He knew what she meant. He had known for weeks that this moment was coming. He had felt it building the way you feel a storm approaching, not in the sky, in your bones. Jolene sat down at the table. Darnell sat across from her. The kitchen light hummed above them. The refrigerator clicked. The building settled. That last night, Jolene began. Her voice was slow, careful. Each word placed like a foot on ice. Your wife woke up around 2 in the morning. She had been asleep for hours. The morphine was high. I didn't think she'd open her eyes again, but she did. She looked at me. And she was clear. I mean, really clear. Like the fog had lifted just long enough for her to say what she needed to say. Jolene paused. Her hands were folded on the table. Her knuckles were no longer cracked. But the memory still lived in her fingers. She said, "Tell Darnell something for me." Darnell stopped breathing. She said, "Tell him don't let the money make him forget how to love." The words landed in the kitchen like stones dropped from a great height. Tell him to find someone who needs him. Not his money, not his name, just him. Jolene's voice trembled but held. Tell him grief is not loyalty, living is. Darnell's hands were flat on the table. His jaw was locked. His eyes were open, but he was not seeing the kitchen anymore. He was seeing a hospital room, a bed, a woman who had known she was dying and had spent her last breath not saying goodbye but giving him permission. Grief is not loyalty. Living is. The door he had locked for 2 years finally opened. And her voice filled the room, not as a ghost, not as a memory, as permission, clear as water, warm as the hand that used to touch his face in the morning and say, "You're going to be late, but I love you anyway." Jolene wiped her eyes. She said one more thing. "Not to you. To me." Darnell looked up. She held my hand. And she said, "Take care of yourself, sweetheart. Promise me you won't give so much that there's nothing left." The irony sat between them like a broken thing neither could fix. Camille had asked Jolene to protect herself, and Jolene had done the exact opposite. She had given everything. Her sleep, her steadiness, her career, her home. She had given until there was nothing left, and the system that should have caught her had let her fall. Darnell tried to speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His throat had closed, completely sealed shut, by something that had been building for 730 days. Then it broke. He cried. Not the controlled kind, not the boardroom kind where you clench your jaw and blink and move on. This was the kind of crying that comes from the floor of yourself, from the basement of every loss you refused to look at. Every morning you poured cold coffee down the sink. Every night you lay in the dark and pretended the empty side of this bed didn't scream. He cried for Camille, for the night he missed, for the words he never heard, for the chair at the dining table that no one sat in, for the woman who had loved him enough to spend her last breath telling him to keep going. Jolene did not move. She let him. She understood what this was. She had been here before on the other side of this kind of breaking, and she knew that the only thing you could do was stay. A door creaked. Small footsteps on the hallway floor. Nico appeared in the kitchen doorway. His pajamas had rockets on them. His eyes were half closed, still foggy with sleep. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not speak at all. He walked to Darnell, climbed into his lap, wrapped his arms around the man's neck, and held on. He smelled like soap and peanut butter and something Darnell could not name. Safety, maybe? Or trust? Or the particular warmth of a child who has decided without logic, without conditions, without explanation, that you are someone worth holding on to. Darnell wrapped his arms around the boy, his face buried in Nico's shoulder, his body shaking, and in that kitchen, in that apartment, in that moment, Camille's voice went quiet. Not because it was gone, but because it had finally been heard. Grief is not loyalty. Living is. 1 year later, Darnell Okafor stood at a podium in a ballroom at the Waldorf Astoria. 400 people in the audience. Investors, hospital administrators, politicians, journalists, philanthropists in evening gowns and tailored suits, holding champagne glasses and name tags, and the particular expression of polished interest that wealthy people wear at charity events. Darnell wore a dark suit, no tie. He had stopped wearing ties 6 months ago. Camille had always hated them, said they made him look like he was trying too hard to be someone he wasn't. Behind him a screen displayed 5 words in white letters on black. The Camille Okafor Foundation. He gripped the edges of the podium, looked out at the room, then spoke. "We celebrate doctors," he said. "We build statues for generals and politicians. We name buildings after CEOs and donors who write checks large enough to put their names on walls. But the nurse who holds your mother's hand at 3 in the morning when no one else will? The aide who cleans up after the worst hours of someone's worst day? The caregiver who absorbs your family's grief so you don't have to carry all of it alone? We forget her name by morning." The room was silent. "This foundation exists because one nurse stayed. One nurse held my wife's hand on the night she died. She sang to her. She braided her hair. She stayed when everyone else left. And the system that employed her punished her for it. She lost her job. She lost her home. She lost everything, not because she failed at her work, because she cared too much. And the system we built has no protocol for that kind of damage. He paused. The Camille Okafor Foundation for Healthcare Workers will provide emergency financial support, mental health services, and legal advocacy for nurses, aides, and caregivers who have been broken by the weight of caring for others. $12 million in initial funding. No applications. No bureaucracy. No forms that make you prove you're suffering enough to deserve help. Just support extended with dignity to people who gave everything and got nothing in return. He looked at the front row. Jolene sat there. She wore a navy blazer she had bought with her first paycheck from Mount Sinai, where she now worked in patient advocacy, the same hospital that had fired her 2 years ago. Nico sat beside her in a small gray vest and new shoes. He was drawing in a notebook. Robots. Always robots. And I want to introduce the co-director of this foundation, Darnell said. Because I don't need another executive. I don't need another consultant with a degree and a spreadsheet. I need someone who has lived it. Someone who knows what it feels like to give everything you have and watch the system forget you exist. Jolene Baptiste. Jolene stood. The room applauded. She did not wave. She did not smile the way people smile at galas. She stood straight, her hand on Nico's shoulder, and she nodded once. The nod of a woman who had earned her place not through connections or credentials but through survival. After the speeches, after the handshakes and the photographs and the champagne toasts, Darnell found them outside near the fountain in front of the hotel. Nico was throwing pennies into the water. Mr. Darnell. Yeah, buddy, does this mean more mamas like mine won't have to sell flowers? Darnell knelt down. Eye level, the way he always did with Nico now. That's exactly what it means, little man. Nico thought about this, nodded, then tilted his head. Good. Because Mama's flowers were pretty, but she's prettier when she's not tired. Jolene pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled. She turned away, then turned back, let the tears fall openly. Darnell put his hand on Nico's head. And for a moment, in front of a fountain filled with pennies and wishes, everything was exactly right. On a Sunday morning, in early October, Darnell Okafor walked through the Chelsea flower market with a nurse and a 9-year-old boy. The market was loud. Vendors shouting prices, water splashing on concrete. The smell of cut stems and wet soil and something green and alive. Buckets of roses and orchids and lilies lined the aisles like a parade of color. Jolene knew this place. She had come here in the dark. 4 a.m, cold hands, empty stomach. Buying whatever was cheapest, stuffing bundles into a plastic bucket, hauling them on the subway to a corner where she would stand for 13 hours and sell them for $7 each. Now she walked through the same aisles in daylight. Nico held her hand. He pointed at everything. Those are big, he said, gesturing at a bucket of sunflowers. You want some. They always look happy. Even when it's raining. She bought him 3 sunflowers. He carried them like a torch petals, bouncing with each step. Darnell found the peonies, white ones. He asked the vendor for a sprig of lavender, tucked it in himself, left side, crossed over the stems. The way Camille liked. They drove to the cemetery in Westchester. Quiet ride, windows down, October air cool and clean. Camille's headstone was simple, white marble, her name, the dates, and underneath a line she had chosen herself before she died. I was here. I was loved. That was enough. Darnell set the flowers down. White peonies and lavender. He knelt on the grass, pressed his palm flat against the stone. I heard you, he said. His voice was quiet, steady. Finally. I heard you, Camille. I'm living. I found someone who needed me. Not my money. Not my name. Just me. You were right. You were always right. Jolene stood behind him. She did not speak. She placed her hand on his shoulder. Light, steady, present. Nico stepped forward. He set 1 sunflower on the grave. Carefully, the way a child handles something precious. For Mrs. Camille, he said. Mama says she was really nice. Darnell closed his eyes. The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. The people who care for us in our darkest hours are rarely the ones we remember to care for in return. Jolene Baptiste held a dying woman's hand and lost everything. Darnell Okafor built an empire and lost the only thing that mattered. But when they found each other again on a sidewalk surrounded by flowers, they discovered something that no amount of money could buy and no amount of grief could destroy. Kindness does not expire. Debts of the heart do not have deadlines. And the greatest thing wealth can purchase is not comfort. It is the chance to repay what money could never measure. Camille's last words had not been a goodbye. They had been a blueprint. Grief is not loyalty. Living is. And finally, 2 years, 1,000 flowers, and one sidewalk later, they were all living. A billionaire, a nurse, and a little boy walking through a flower market on a Sunday morning, each carrying a bouquet, each carrying a second chance, each carrying the quiet proof that love outlasts everything, even death. Thank you for watching. If this story moved, you take a moment to subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and remember the people who care for you deserve to be cared for too. See you on the next one.